We come now to our sermon time, and I personally just want to thank all of you for staying in touch, for staying connected during this time of COVID. Um, it's just going to be remembered as such a strange time. And when I talk to people, what I hear maybe most often is a kind of sense of profound grief that people are going through right now. I think it's a creative grief. I think something important is being born out of it, but I think it's a very hard time for many people. I think to realize that with something like 200,000 Americans at this point have died of this disease, and yet you have a leadership that almost wants to disclaim the fact of all of these deaths and is focused on business over human beings. And I think this creates a profound sadness of realizing what our capitalist economy has always been. And this week, a lot of people were very sad to hear the president, the White House, saying that federal agencies are now being pressured not to do anti-racist training, that the idea of white privilege is seen as anti-American, and that's in quotes. And this creates a profound sadness in people who kind of lived in denial of the racism of the country. And there's just kind of a realization that there are many Americans, maybe 37%, who have no intention of ever sharing this nation fairly with people of color. So the question that I have addressing our scripture today, and the question I invite you to also ask during this 15 minutes or so, is, does religion really have anything to say that is healing in our world today, in these circumstances? Jesus in this passage is going to say, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin, sometimes translated rust, where moths and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where moths and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now we can understand that as escapist, as saying that you're going to be mistreated in this life, that there will be injustice as long as we're alive, but then once we get to heaven, everything will be corrected. The idea that on earth, we have to put up with abuse, but that when everything is lifted into heaven, then we will be given a true treasure. And obviously that explanation of the passage has been used to deny injustice going way back, and used by televangelists to fleece their congregations going way back. That by giving to me, by giving to your church, to your minister, to your pastor, you're somehow giving to Jesus and God, which that's very strange math. But what I think is important to realize is that we can't use modern concepts to understand what someone like Jesus or Buddha or Confucius is saying. That we have to understand that they were maybe speaking more profoundly than sort of a literal understanding. In the ancient world, very often the idea of heaven was used to talk about whatever is transcendent. That this is very hard for us to get to. When we look up in the sky, we no longer see this kind of clockwork of precision and exactitude. We don't see these almost like living intelligences that are these glowing lights. We see an explosion. So it's very hard to get emotionally where I think Jesus is talking about today. In the ancient world, the skies were almost your entertainment at night. They were the map for life. You knew all the constellations. Throughout the course of the year, you heard these stories. And what the stories did, they were mythological, but what they taught you is, what does it mean to be a human being in the cosmos? So looking up the sky was sort of like coming home. It was like realizing that there's some kind of wisdom or guidance written into things. And when people looked up at the sky, I think what Jesus is saying by heaven, possibly, is that we can fall in love with the way of things. that our lives will always be a mixture of good and bad, of pain and pleasure. But we can love all of that together in life. We can ask, what is life? What is the way of life? What is the way of things? Sometimes called the way of heaven back in the day. Now, like I say, I think that's kind of a leap for us emotionally to try to get to that point. So I think by translating it into more modern imagery, I think we can get what Jesus may be talking about here. And that is, I think we relate to the beach a lot more emotionally than we do to the sky. Then we go to the beach, there's some part of us that seems to remember the deep intuition that we come from the sea. That our tears are like seawater, our blood plasma is essentially seawater. And when we go to the ocean, to the beach, we have a kind of sense of homecoming. A lot of us do. That we have a sense that we're returning to our source, to our origin. Someone said, the beach is in our blood. Everyone in our family returns to the beach instinctively, just like the sea turtles. I can't find the author of that, but I like the quote. So when Jesus is talking about the sky, there's more of a kind of a sense of the understanding the cosmos. We're children of the stars. That's a very modern understanding. But the ancients understood that too, at least intuitively, that we belong to the whole cosmos. So even though life can be very unfair, it can be short, it can be tragic, that we're part of a larger story. And I think this is the kind of comfort that Jesus is trying to say to us. I think what he's trying to say, I think there's kind of three thoughts that I'm trying to weave together here. That when we love that which is passing, when he's talking about the earth, he's talking about the realm that comes and goes, that passes, that belongs to chance. But when we fall in love with the whole of things, with the life process itself, with the way of heaven, or the way of the beach, when we go to the beach, we have the sense the tide goes in, the tide goes out. But somehow that's a relaxing thought, because what we're doing is putting our little lives with all of its problems in the larger context of the flow of things. Of course, life is give and take. Life is gain and loss. That's the process. And when we're there, it's beautiful, right? But we're seeing all these seashells. Those are all broken lives. And if we lived at the individual level, the beach would be a very depressing place. I mean, all those shells are used to be people's backbones. So, fish people anyway. So this is a profound sense of placing our little life. You're not losing the idea of what's important to you. You still love and you still try to enjoy things, but you remember the larger context out of which you have emerged, been created, or evolved. Schweitzer said at one point, he said, just as the wave cannot exist for itself, but is ever a part of the heaving surface of the ocean, so must I never live my life for itself, but always in the experience which is going on around me. I think Schweitzer had a sense of the common life. It seems to me very obvious that Jesus had a sense of the common life. And I may be mistaken in terms of the specifics of what he's saying, but I think in the Sermon on the Mount as a whole, when he says, look at the birds of the air, look at the flowers in the field, it's reminding us of this larger pulsing life and loving the way of life. And one good way of talking about it is the way of heaven. The treasures there, this is probably a useless fact, but the word for treasure is the word we get thesaurus from. So it's not necessarily gold and silver. It's the things that are most valuable to the heart. You think of the little drawer that parents have. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, of the poems, the cards that you made for them, the accomplishments, the grades that you made. And these would not be treasures to anybody else. But to someone who loves you, those are more important than silver and gold. And Jesus is trying to say the treasures of your heart are like that. They belong to the whole of life. So he said, don't pile up treasures where moths and rust and things like that devour. Don't limit yourself to time. You live in time, but you don't belong to time. It's what Jesus is trying to teach, I believe. So there's great pain that comes into our life if we love that which is passing as though it was permanent. We can learn to love the whole of things to this flow. And Jesus is going to say, make that which can't be taken from you, those deep inner treasures, make that the treasure of your life. Because where that is, that's where your heart's going to be. That's where your emotions are going to flow. The Stoics used to teach that the more we value things that are outside our control, the more we suffer. And if you think about that, that has to be true. The more we love the things of time, the things that are passing, the more life can be disappointing and can lead us into despair even. But if we see those brief moments as these brilliant, blissful experiences of the life process, of the whole life process, if we go into our loving of the sacred other as realizing that we both pass, but everybody's going to die. When we pretend that's not true, it takes us out of the river of life. It leaves us stranded on the shoreline. So Jesus says, where your treasure is, what you love, what you focus on, what you try to hold on to, your emotions are naturally going to follow that. Where your treasure is, your heart will be. St. Augustine said a little more specifically. He said, where your pleasure is, there is your treasure. Where your treasure is, there is your heart. Where your heart is, there is your happiness. Let me say that again. This is St. Augustine, who for all his problems did understand that Christianity is supposed to be about love. But he said, where your pleasure is, there's nothing wrong with pleasure. Pleasure is a good thing. Where your pleasure is, though, that's where your treasure is going to be. That's what you're going to value. Where your treasure is, there your heart is. And where your heart is, there your happiness will be. So as much as we enjoy the passing, we have to love it as passing, as temporary, as impermanent. Because when we love it as though it were permanent, it will break our hearts. I think another way of trying to understand what Jesus is saying, Alan Watts put it this way. He said of life, we have to discover that there is no safety. That seeking safety in life is painful. And that when we imagine we have found it, we don't like it. Right? We're bored. It has no worth to us. Because it's the flow of life, the ebb and flow, like standing at the beach. We would never want the tide just to come in and never go back out again, but we treat life like that. We want to give and not lose. And yet that's not the game that we're playing. That's not the pulse of things. So in a sense, what a teacher like Jesus is saying is align the pulse of your very being to the larger pulse of life. Make your heart's treasure the way of things altogether. Don't fall in love with things that are going to tear your heart out if you can keep from it. Like the beach, our lives have great storms, but I think it was Van Gogh that said, but they also have pearls. But these storms, like the ocean, they give us treasures, but they're treasures of the heart. They're not things that maybe anybody else will see as important, but to you, they are everything. So again, what I think might be said here, that Jesus might be saying, that would apply very much to the situation we are in, is when we love things that are passing, it breaks our heart. but we can fall in love with the way of things, with the ebb and flow of things, with the way of heaven. If we want to be happy in the most profound sense, joyful in the most profound sense, then to make our treasures, our heart's treasures, those deep spiritual things that cannot be taken from us. Let's close again with Alan Watts' statement, because I think it's maybe what Jesus is trying to share with us. What we have to discover in life is that there is no safety, and that seeking safety is painful, and that when we imagine that we have found it, we don't like it. Or as Jesus said, those who seek to save their lives will lose it. Well, thank you for being here today. If you're interested, we're having a conversation 7 o'clock today. You can go on our website and find the site of that, get feedback, explore this passage even more profoundly and deeply. But again, thank you for not losing contact. Thank you for remaining a part of this connectedness. If you're from somewhere else, you're not a member of St. Andrews, and you're coming to our website, hope you feel also included and also valued. So as you go out into this week, take care of your heart. Hold on to those things which cannot be taken from you. I leave you now to your own reflection on these words.